The relationship between Lenny and Candy's dog. This is one of those questions that makes a lot of students go, "What are you talking about, Mr. Dislover? I have no idea what you mean." And what I would argue is, if you ever see a question like that, one of the biggest strategies to use is to just say, "Okay, so what do these two things have in common?" And if you thought about it, you'd say, "Okay, well." Lenny is George's responsibility. Candy's dog is Candy's responsibility. When Candy's dog is old and useless, Candy, people tell him, yeah, you got to kind of put that dog out of its misery. When Lenny makes a mistake that he really can't come back from, George realizes he has to take care of Lenny in a way that kind of ends the cycle of violence and those sorts of things. So obviously, we start to see some similarities there. You can also point to something as simple as, well, both were shot by the same gun, and there's something poetic about that, where both Lenny and Candy's dog were both shot by Carlson's Luger. So we start to see those similarities, but the biggest difference that you need to point at or to think about is Candy's dog does not get killed by Candy. Candy's dog gets killed by Carlson. And at one point, after Candy's dog is killed, but before George has to make a difficult decision with Lenny, Candy says to George, I shouldn't have let someone else shoot my dog. I should have done that myself. And that's a really formative moment for George because it's a moment where we see him kind of show or some understanding of Candy, but also it sets up the case, it sets up the scenario for him to show that he is a dynamic character. Remember that dynamic characters are characters who grow, change, develop, or show the ability to adapt their behavior with given circumstances. In this case, George is learning from Candy's mistake. And so George takes responsibility for Lenny and his responsibility to Lenny by doing something that Candy did not do for Candy's dog. That makes George a dynamic character. It makes George somebody who we can say, yep, he definitely learned from the mistake that Candy made. So there's a big, long kind of chain of logic to sort of connect there. But again, that's another element where John Steinbeck is making it as literarily interesting as possible, where they can say this is how George arrived at the conclusion that George arrived at, and he did that because he learned from other humans' mistakes.